Cooperación triangular para el fortalecimiento de la implementación de la EIT en Colombia y Perú. Los países de América Latina y el Caribe implementan la EIT y son epicentro de innovaciones y buenas prácticas, convirtiéndose en referentes para otros países implementadores. Alemania, Colombia y Perú implementan desde 2018 un proyecto de cooperación triangular para el fortalecimiento de los procesos EIT en los países y el intercambio de experiencias entre ellos. Este tipo de cooperación permite establecer una relación de tipo horizontal, en donde cada país ha aportado desde sus conocimientos y competencias y ha recibido apoyo según sus intereses. En Colombia, se han apoyado las discusiones sobre pagos ambientales y la implementación subnacional, mientras que en el Perú se ha documentado la experiencia subnacional ya en marcha y se ha apoyado la concepción de su portal de datos. Este proyecto se realiza gracias al apoyo del Fondo Regional para la Cooperación Triangular en América Latina y el Caribe, instrumento del Ministerio Federal de Cooperación Económica y Desarrollo de Alemania para apoyar a la región. Con el apoyo de Cooperación Alemana, GIZ, EIT Colombia, EIT Perú. El rol de la industria extractiva en la reactivación económica. El mundo atraviesa una grave crisis sanitaria y económica por la aparición del virus del COVID-19 y las medidas de confinamiento necesarias para contener su avance. En este momento sigue la incertidumbre sobre la evolución de la pandemia y se han visto rebrotes en varios países, aunque se ven señales de reactivación económica. Los países de la región tienen una presencia importante de industria extractiva y explotan y exportan commodities como petróleo, cobre, oro y carbón, entre otros. La explotación de estos recursos es importante para sus cuentas nacionales, al ser una fuente importante de ingresos fiscales y por representar una proporción importante de sus canastas exportadoras. Además, las empresas son una fuente de empleos y dinamizadoras de economías locales. Mientras que algunos commodities han visto fuertemente afectado su precio, otros han ganado atractivo y se han cotizado al alza. Dado el tamaño de la industria y las capacidades en la región, se espera que la industria extractiva juegue un rol importante en la necesaria reactivación económica. ¿Qué rol puede jugar la industria extractiva en esta reactivación? ¿Qué tendencias se profundizarán o acelerarán por efecto de la pandemia? Con el apoyo de Cooperación Alemana GIZ, EIT Colombia, EIT Perú. En referentes para otros países implementadores. Alemania, Colombia y Perú implementan desde 2018 un proyecto de cooperación triangular para el fortalecimiento de los procesos EIT en los países y el intercambio de experiencias entre ellos. Este tipo de cooperación permite establecer una relación de tipo horizontal, en donde cada país ha aportado desde sus conocimientos y competencias y ha recibido apoyo según sus intereses. En Colombia, se han apoyado las discusiones sobre pagos ambientales y la implementación subnacional, mientras que en el Perú se ha documentado la experiencia subnacional ya en marcha y se ha apoyado la concepción de su portal de datos. Este proyecto se realiza gracias al apoyo del Fondo Regional para la Cooperación Triangular en América Latina y el Caribe, instrumento del Ministerio Federal de Cooperación Económica y Desarrollo de Alemania para apoyar a la región. Con el apoyo de Cooperación Alemana, GIZ, EIT Colombia, EIT Perú. Cooperación triangular para el fortalecimiento de la implementación de la EIT en Colombia y Perú. Los países de América Latina y el Caribe implementan la EIT y son epicentro de innovaciones y buenas prácticas, convirtiéndose en referentes para otros países implementadores. Alemania, Colombia y Perú implementan desde 2018 un proyecto de cooperación triangular para el fortalecimiento de los procesos EIT en los países y el intercambio de experiencias entre ellos. Este tipo de cooperación permite establecer una relación de tipo horizontal, en donde cada país ha aportado desde sus conocimientos y competencias y ha recibido apoyo según sus intereses. En Colombia, se han apoyado las discusiones sobre pagos ambientales y la implementación subnacional, mientras que en el Perú se ha documentado la experiencia subnacional ya en marcha y se ha apoyado la concepción de su portal de datos. Este proyecto se realiza gracias al apoyo del Fondo Regional para la Cooperación Triangular en América Latina y el Caribe, instrumento del Ministerio Federal de Cooperación Económica y Desarrollo de Alemania para apoyar a la región. Con el apoyo de Cooperación Alemana, GIZ, EITI Colombia, EITI Perú.
Todavía estás en mute, Lore.
Sí, estás en mute.
Welcome to the sixth and last seminar of good practices and trends in the extractive industry from the Ministry of Mines and Energy and the AD Colombia. We want to finalize this series of webinars by thanking our strategic partners, the GIZ and the Peruvian government. Apart from thanking our partners for the work that has been conducted, we also want to thank our national and international speakers for their participation and for sharing all their knowledge with us. We want to thank the International Secretariat of the EITI for their support. From the Colombian extractive industry, we highlight our support to these type of instances and to the implementation of EITI as a clear signal of the commitment of the government with greater transparency and the strengthening of the governance in our sector. In today's session, we will talk about the role of the extractive industry in the economic reactivation. For that, we have Alejandra Wood, Executive Director of the Center of Studies of a nonprofit based in Chile that works, and she has worked for over 20 years in the mining sector, mainly in BHP, where she developed the corporate marketing to place Escondida among the leaders of opinion and general audience in aspects related to community engagement and environment. Then she moved on to work as a manager of corporate affairs in Scotiabank for 7 years and also as an executive director of the Cultural Center Gabriela Mistral. We also have Ana Carolina Gonzalez, who is an officer of the program of the Ford Foundation and also member of the multi-stakeholder group of EITI Colombia between 2013 and 2016, and she was a coordinator of the research group on mining and energy resources in the university in Colombia, and she was also a member of the board of EITI International and also co-founder of the Civil Society Table for the Transparency in the Extractive Sector. We also have with us the Minister Diego Mesa is an economist of the Concordia University in Canada with a master's degree in economy in the University of McGill in Canada, and also minister and also holder of the CFA Institute in the USA. Before joining the government, Mr. Mesa worked as an economist and expert in the Department of Fiscal Policies from the International Monetary Fund for 2 periods, adding up to 10 years, in which he led and participated in different technical assistance missions on public policies for the extractive industry in over 25 countries. The minister has also worked as a manager and senior economist of the consulting entity PricewaterhouseCoopers in the Pentagon, British Columbia, and Canada, where he advised customers of the private and public sector in issues of energy, oil, and mining. We also have Jaime Gades Delgado, Vice Minister of Mining of the Peruvian government, an economist from the Catholic University of Peru, and he has worked in several positions in the public and private sector. In the public sector, he was Executive Secretary of the National Fund of Training and Employment, Director of Articulation of Territorial Budgets in the Ministry of Economy and Finance, General Director of Promotion and Sustainability in the Ministry of Energy and Mines, and from August this year, he was appointed as Vice Minister of Mining. And lastly, we have Nicolas, who is an economist from the University of Birmingham and also Masters in Economic Sciences of the University of Warning, both in the United Kingdom. His work has focused around the extractive sector, and he has worked in the public, private sector, and the academy, working in the design of strategies and tools to maximize the benefits and minimize the externalities of the investments in the extractive sector. Recently, he has worked on the integration of the SDGs into the strategies and the role of the extractive industry during the energy transition. We will start today's session with a 20-minute presentation that will be given by Nicolas Maini, followed by a discussion moderated by himself, taking as a main pillar the role of the extractive industry in the reactivation of the economy. All the webinar will take place in Spanish and there will be simultaneous translation available in English, and we will take questions in both languages. So we kindly invite you to ask any questions you may have. Now I'd like to give the floor to Nicolas for him to give us his presentation. Thank you. Great, thank you so much, Lorena, and congratulations everyone for the series of webinars that I know it has been a lot of work, but I know that it has also been a full success, a complete success. So welcome and congratulations everyone. So dear Minister Mesa, Vice Minister Delgado, Ana Carolina Gonzalez, and Alejandra Good, and audience in general. In my presentation, I will try to give you a general overview of some of the impacts that we have seen in the mining sector in the Andean region regarding the world pandemic, and then we'll talk about some trends of longer term and also how the pandemic has impacted the long-term trends. And with that, I hope that that will be a good triggering for the debate that I will try to moderate later on. Now, just a second, I'm going to be sharing my screen with you. Okay, are you able to see my screen? Yes, great. Great then. In order to begin and to give you a little bit of context, the measures to contain the spread of the pandemic have caused a decrease in the economic activity globally in all the countries, and this has resulted in a global recession of the economy, and it has been very significant and it has impacted all of the sectors of the economy, as well as the mining sector, of course. Now we see, especially in Europe, that there is a second wave of spread coming along. So there is a lot of uncertainty in the global economy because everything sort of depends on how this virus will be controlled and when there will be a vaccine available. The international markets have also been very severely affected in terms of logistics, transportation, supply chains, and from the sector of consumption of minerals all the way to production in the Andean region. Looking at that situation, we have seen that in some countries, when the COVID started, certain mining projects were stopped. Actually, in most countries, they were appointed as a strategic sector, and because of that, they were able to continue to operate. However, in many occasions, there were strikes, or they would stop the operations because of COVID infections, and in the area of production, there have been interruptions of the production. And in the different regions, there were also issues in which communities were against the reactivation of the mining projects because of fear that the mining workers would bring the COVID to the regions. And in other cases, the industry was seen as a source of help, both for the healthcare of people as well as for protective materials. So what we have seen in the mining regions has been different, and there have been different reactions. So it's interesting to see how the prices, usually when all of this started, the prices dropped very quickly, with the exception of gold. And after the relief packages that were put in place by different countries that were mainly consuming these minerals, we're talking about the US, Europe, and China mainly, there was once again an increase in some prices of some commodities. This is very based on commodity. You can see on the graph here that I have included four different commodities that are relevant to the countries that are nowadays present in this meeting. We have oil, for instance, that had a drop from the outbreak of the virus, as you can see in the black line. The black dotted line shows the beginning of the outbreak. There was a decrease in April. As you can see, there was quite a drop. Coal has also decreased prices in 17%, and gold continuously it has increased its prices because investors also see gold as a commodity where it is safe to invest. In the case of copper, we have seen a lot of volatility, as I said at the beginning. It decreased very quickly, and later on, after the recovery programs were put in place, especially in the countries that consume copper, we have seen that the prices have had a certain recovery and now are even above what we saw in 2019. Also, looking at a global overview regarding what's going on in the mining sector in general in terms of investments, we see how the investments have dropped in this year in 2020. However, if we look at a comparison between the different regions in the second quarter in 2020, we see that Latin America continues to be a place that attracts the investments in the mining sector. At the same time, certain questions come up regarding the interdependency of countries or some regions that are strong in the mining production. For instance, like I showed earlier, especially countries and regions that rely heavily on the coal and oil sector where the prices are dropping rapidly. That, of course, has had an impact over the regions, both due to the lack of this economic activity and also because of the tax collection that comes from this sector. Now, looking at some trends that we had seen already even before the outbreak of the virus, but now we have seen that these trends have been sort of accelerated during this period of time. And we see these five trends that I am going to mention now: the energy transition, the ESG demands or standards from the investors that are asking for greater transparency in terms of social aspects, environmental aspects, and also aspects related to governance. We see that there are certain trends regarding traceability. There's also a request for consumers that are trying to understand where the products are coming from and what is the impact of the products that they are using. We also see the automation and teleoperation of the mining sector and also geopolitical risks. And I will show some examples of each of those in the following slides. Starting with the energy transition. And if you look at the left-hand side, there is a graph from a document of the World Bank that estimates more or less which are going to be the demands for the different minerals if there is a transition that happens faster in different scenarios actually. If there is a faster energy transition or a slower one to shift to a greener economic system. And as you can see, there are two products that are very important for the region, which are nickel and copper. And if we were to look at the different scenarios where there is a transition of a faster pace, the demand increases significantly for those two minerals. Now, in relation to the pandemic, if we look at the other side of the picture, you see the budget of the European Union that if you compare that with the budget for recovery that is available for the financial crisis, there is definitely a sort of a greener approach. So in this budget, 30% of the policies or of the allocation of resources is designed to achieve a greater or a greener economy in Europe that aims at this transition, or at least in Europe, the transition is being accelerated thanks to the pandemic. Now, the second trend that we see has to do with the demands for ESG from the investors. To the left, you see a graph that shows different sectors, and in 2019, Standard and Poor's classified the mining sector as the sector with highest risks, both social and environmental risks. So it is seen as an area where investors have to be or are trying to pay more attention to these factors. And to the right side from Fitch Ratings, we see some areas where investors are seeing risks that will be materialized in the following 5 years. And it is interesting to see that water is the number one risk. That risk increases specifically interesting here when we think about Chile and the south of Peru, where there is also issues and conflicts around water. But also the second factor that will definitely increase has to do with the community engagement and with the workers, of course, and also if you go lower, the governance of operational and transparency risks. So it is, there are many risks that are related to the environment, but also we see social risks and also governance risks.
The next trend that exists is this question about traceability. Consumers are putting more focus on labeling themselves as carbon neutral, not only on what they produce, but also in their supply chain. And here we have the left-hand side uh, a picture of ELYSIS, which is aluminium, which is a new product developed with the support of Apple in order to reduce the emissions of carbon from Apple. Just to put an example of a consumer who is betting or maybe is looking at the sector, at the mining sector and mining process sector on how to reduce their carbon footprint. In the region, we also have the copper mark, which is designed for copper, and also we have a conversation of traceability along the supply chain. So not only certify the mines for good practices, but also the consumer can see, so they can see the product where it's coming from. Automatization and teleoperation. Well, this is a factor that also increased in the last few years. And now, in terms of COVID, we've also have seen a reduction of workers in some operations that are not necessarily, so we don't see a lower in production. And for causes of coronavirus, and because of causes that shouldn't be together, so many people in these small spaces, we can play with a factor that increases this trend for the adoption of new technologies on the mining sector. And the last trend that I believe is also relevant are the risks, the geopolitical risks. In the last few months, we have seen in the larger economies of the world tensions that are increasing In regards to the mining sector, I believe that it is relevant. It's worth highlighting this list of critical minerals that are being developed both in Europe as well as in the United States and as well as in Japan and other countries. And we say, okay, maybe we need to ensure for our technologies and our transitions and energy transitions so we can have access, so we have diversified mineral access, so we're not depending on just one single region that is producing or processing certain minerals. So therefore, I believe that this is a geopolitical factor also can have an impact in the mining sector and producing countries. So therefore, it would be interesting to have that as an opinion, this trend. Well, that is just to give some context and the trends that we have seen now in the countries and in the Andean countries. We have very strong hope, which is the mining sector should be supporting the recovery, the economic recovery in the Andean countries. And here we can get some examples of threats, both in Peru and maybe the title gives it away. The mining sector has a key role in in the economic reactivation as well as in Colombia, and also is a key player in the economic reactivation. And also in Chile, the Minister of Mining promotes a portfolio of 18 projects by 17 billion to support projects of reactivation. And an example of how this is affecting in the technology, this sector, the crisis destroys 50,000 jobs in the mining industry, but the participation of women growth. So these are all impacts that are missing this trend that we are looking now more in the long run with the impacts that we are seeing in the pandemic.
Okay, especially now and always, we always have to look at this with critical eyes. We have to look at the forecast of prices with critical eyes because they're usually wrong, especially in times like this. But just to give you an example regarding copper and nickel, right? This is also related to the demand and the energy transition as well. It has been forecasted that in the long run, the prices of these minerals will also increase. So, in that case, there is an opportunity in order to attract greater investment into the mining sector to support the financial recovery of the Andean countries. And with this, I would like to move on to address some challenges that came to mind that we definitely need to take into account if we expect or if we want to focus on the mining sector when it comes to the financial recovery. First of all, we need to maintain the social and environmental standards. Secondly, we have to strengthen the subnational structures of the state, especially so that people or regions that are suffering the impact of the mining sector also see and feel the benefits that are due to the mining sector. We also need to maintain the progress that has been made and also to strengthen transparency and accountability. I believe that that gives us a very interesting opportunity regarding this international trend with greater pressure for transparency from the consumers and investors. And we need to see how to use that type of data to support local governments and communities as well to help them do monitoring and to improve the local policies when it comes to the priorities for development. And lastly, the creation of a shared vision of the role of the extractive activity in the territories. Well, with that, I would like to leave you with some questions to trigger a discussion. The first question is, how do we compatibilize the attraction of good quality investments with keeping up with the environmental social standards in the extractive sector. Secondly, do you see any options for regional cooperation, understanding that Latin America is a region that exports commodities, that is also responsible for the production of minerals that are key for the energy transition? The third question, what role should the countries that consume these products have in the discussions regarding traceability of minerals and also the standards in projects that are being developed here in this region? And lastly, what role should the extractive industry play in the economic recovery of your country, and how would it be possible to strengthen its contribution towards sustainable growth? Okay, with that, I would like to give to each speaker 5 minutes to reflect on the presentation and the questions. And later on, we're going to move on to a conversation with very quick interventions responding to specific questions in order to cover as many topics as possible in the little time that we have left in the webinar. I would like to ask the panel members to follow up with questions to each other if that comes up. And after 2 or 3 rounds of discussion back and forth, we're going to open the floor to take questions from the audience, and I will try to include those questions into the discussion. So I would love it if you could send your questions at any time through the chat box in order to ask those questions. And please, if you want to ask a question specifically to a panel member, please do add their name to your question. With that, I would like to give the floor to the panel members for them to reflect during 5 minutes, more or less, and I would like to start with Ana Carolina, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nicolas, and good morning, everyone. Thank you to my colleagues from GIZ for this invitation, and thank you for being here with Minister Mesa, Vice Minister Galvez, Alejandro, and we are discussing about this very important topic. I believe that I would like to make three reflections from this presentation that has been so interesting, made by Nicolas, writing down that my perception is that the extractive sector definitely can and should play a very important role in this economic recovery process, with three annotations that I believe are fundamental. The first is that I believe that it is very important to think beyond economic recovery in the idea of economic transformation. I believe that the way in which the pandemic found us show the vulnerabilities in the way we have been dealing with businesses in terms of equality and many other topics, but also in terms of performance and dependencies, commodities, vulnerability, external clashes, as you mentioned. And I believe that it is key to think that it's not only about going back to what we had before, but how do we do it to achieve something that is way better? President Duque said in an article yesterday there's a need to build a more equal society. And I totally agree with the premise. I believe it's fundamental to think about ourselves differently. Second, if, if the sector is very important, because I will go into that in my third idea, effectively, well, the state continues to depend, both Peru and Colombia depend heavily on the rents generated by the sector for the public income. So it's very necessary that this importance is not above the high social environmental standards that are required, and also of the effective contribution that from the economic point of view the industry can generate. So I believe this is an invitation to not take for granted that all projects will contribute in the same way from the economic standpoint. There are projects that generate a lot of rents, some a bit less, but there are questions regarding these new minerals. And so there are some questions regarding gold and regarding the royalties of gold of 4% nowadays. How can we now uh, tackle these increases in prices because we don't really have the same instruments, the same fiscal instruments that we have in the case of oil. And I believe that this is the discussion that we need to be having, and also a discussion in the sense of how can we achieve that the sector that will be an engine for this reactivation can guarantee that we will not be reducing the seriousness and the rigorousness with which we need to carry out the environmental processes and the consultation and participation processes. And as you were mentioning, Nicolas, in your presentation, I believe this is fundamental. The markets and the investors are not asking less performance in terms of environmental and social aspects because of the pandemic. Quite on the contrary, what we see, it's greater demands because of what this pandemic is showing us is what could be coming if we don't take the climate crisis seriously. So I believe the attention on those topics is not going to be but increasing. It will increase in the short term, especially if we talk about energy transition when we are trying to sell minerals to countries so they can have a more sustainable economy. It wouldn't make much sense to do so when we have problems of human rights violations, environmental problems over here at home. So I believe the trend should be towards increasing the rigorousness in terms of environmental topics and the consultation levels as well, because our countries, such as Colombia and Peru, have understood from the last decade that if we don't do it in this way, sustainability, financial sustainability, and operation will be affected in their day-to-day work. And that has been proven to us by the increase of social and environmental conflicts in the last decade. I believe it is important to start looking at this consultation and this participation not as a barrier, but quite on the contrary, think that the barrier has been not having these spaces that are fundamental for consultation and participation, and think that this reactivation of the sector and this role, in this sense, we should be thinking that some projects maybe can come out and maybe some others cannot. But that is part of the equation now. And the last idea is that I believe that the sector is very important also because of how we were saying this important dependency of the revenues generated by the sector and the potential of the sector, but that also is not necessarily good news. This is a dependency. The role of the sector and the companies themselves can be playing in the diversification, and this is fundamental, not only in the diversification of the mining portfolio, but also the diversification of the economy itself. We know that these are companies that are not job intensive, and it's fundamental to support other ways of generations of jobs in the local sector, such as the farming sector, that with the pandemic was we saw the importance of guaranteeing food security, and that support that companies can provide in the local sectors, in the territories for the productive diversification of the sectors. I believe that is of the essence. And also, we need to help to diversify the sources of energy because now that we think in being countries that are providing minerals, key minerals for energy transition, is something that you were mentioning. How do we do it for those minerals to also be working for the energy transition at a domestic level? Because it would be very wrong of us to we provide minerals outside to other countries to do so, and then make the use of of fossil fuel-based energy more heavy. Lastly, a role that I believe is fundamental in this sector is from the point of view of the profits and the royalties of the mining sector. How can we be more audacious and smart on how we invest these resources in order to reach the populations that are going to be the most vulnerable ones in the pandemic, especially the rural populations and the ethnic groups? But also, how can we invest in a way that we can promote this transition in a fairer, more sustainable way that is in line with the commitments that our countries, both countries, that have been taking on this flag in this fight against climate change and the commitments that we have acquired. So that will be an initial reaction to what you have stated. So thank you so much for this space again. Excellent, Ana Carolina. Let me now give the floor to Alejandra for her intervention. Thank you, Nicolas. I would really like to appreciate this invitation from EITI. Thank you, Ana Carolina. Greetings to you, also Minister Messi, Minister Galvez. I totally agree with most of what has been presented by Ana Carolina. I believe that we all agree that the minerals are of the essence for modern life and also for energy transition. And in that sense, our continent is very well positioned in order to provide it In the case of Chile, especially, we have been given not only mineral wealth, but also a great capacity of obtaining renewable energies in order to produce these minerals. However, we are in this sort of crossroads. In the last 30 years, we have been producing great numbers of copper ore, and our mines are a bit older. We have great challenges regarding water, for instance, and in the territory. And I believe that reflection of whether or not we need to be doing more of the same, or is maybe time to think how we're going to be inserting ourselves in the 21st century, taking off these advantages, these competitive advantages that we have, and at the same time, meeting also the demand for a supply of all of these minerals in a responsible way. I believe here we have plenty of opportunities, not only in order to comply to what the consumers are demanding, but because in this process we can also be more transparent with our own communities at a local level and also with our interested parties. So, the fact that we are a mining company is an opportunity, a virtuous opportunity in terms of being able to build upstream an offer of services and technology around mining that is exportable. We believe that is there is where we need to create some complexity on our economic activity around this great competitive advantage. But we also have the obligation of doing so in a more inclusive and sustainable way. Perfect. Thank you very much, Ale. Minister Mesa, I would like to give you the floor now. Thank you very much. Greetings to everyone and the panel members and Nicolas. And I would like to thank the space to share this in this panel, in this bilateral or multilateral panel. So, well, I also agree with several of the things that have been exposed here. What Ana Carolina was saying, the topic of the standards, environmental standards, and social standards, of course, has to be very strict and rigorous for the extractive industry. And in the case of Colombia, we have to support the institutionality that we have in the country. I believe that there has been a work of several years in order to strengthen the environmental authority, for instance, for strengthening now what we're going to be having in the prior consultation authorities, which is one of the instruments that we have in the Colombian norm. And from the point of view of the relationship with investments during the pandemic, of course, if we comply with these requirements that have been of suitable standards, then the economic topic should be to the private sector. So there are some important points of view exposed by Carolina that I believe are quite relevant nowadays, especially in the case of mining, as we were saying. So remember that the profits that the revenues that these projects generate should be suitable for the government or for the state, and we should be reviewing the fiscal elements that we have in place. There's a lot of literature on the topic, and that is a topic that we discuss in length when we talk about it. And I believe that we need to strike a balance because, as Nicolas was saying in his presentation, the most characteristic part of this sector is the volatility in prices, but this volatility in prices may or may not be translated in volatility in revenues. And then what's important for governments is that the projects provide revenues, because if the prices are volatile, the costs are not. So we need to see that this is progressive. So the more revenues, the more participation from the state in the project we have, but also the lowest the profitability. It doesn't mean that the projects, well, are non-economically viable. And that is because we have several fiscal and tax tools in order to achieve this state. And I believe that this is a very reasonable point of view. And we also need to have a floor. What is the minimum you want to be receiving as a counter loan for these resources? So in the social aspect now, the environmental topic for me is relatively simple. Environmentally speaking, this clear standards of environmental impact studies that companies need to comply with. And in the case that we have, let's say, questions about the compliance of it. Maybe the environmental license should not be granted, and that is it. So maybe we should ask maybe why the environmental authorities that are independent have been in the process of strengthening the human capital they have, that has been quite astonishing. In the social aspect, also from the fiscal regime that which is how we are collecting these revenues, be because of royalties or taxes, we have part of the distribution and the assignation, which is fundamental. And here in Colombia, we have taken a great step with the reform to royalties, because of course, you need to ensure that these resources are invested efficiently from the social point of view. And I believe that is regarding the first question Nicolas was posing. And invested how? So we can ensure that the regions where we have the production of hydrocarbons for mining are the regions that will be covering their basic needs, that they will have a capacity of diversifying, as Carolina was mentioning, because it is good that we leverage ourselves in the resources, but by definition, by nature, these resources are finite. And we need to think in the medium and long term for a plan of economic diversification and capacity diversification in those regions. So in Colombia, the sector, even though we are not a country that is a great producer nor of mining nor of oil, the economy does indeed depend to a great extent in this sector. When you look at the national bills, the sector of hydrocarbons and mining, energy, or for the whole portfolio, with a public service providing natural gas and hydrocarbons, which are part of minerals such as carbon, which is how we would term electricity, and that is the second engine of the economy. That is 13% of the country's GDP after the trade sector. Of course, in exports is more than 55%, in direct investments more than 33%, and the fiscal topic is not lesser. So we have an important percentage for in the nation. So in the territory agencies, the fiscal part, but at a municipality or department level or province level, however we want to call it, is about a third of the project of investment and in the royalties. So that is why it's so important to be able to distribute royalties. And here, in order to conclude now, and so as to not to expand myself so much, what we did in order to summarize this, it was a public policy decision that was very aware. So we're not very much in line with the international literature of prioritizing investment on saving, because we're always going to be talking about saving, intergenerational savings, because of this, because of that. But in a country such as Colombia, which is a middle-income country, but we have basic needs that still are very broad at a social level, with a percentage of the population that has no access to electricity, no access to basic services and utilities, and the social returns are not so we're not saving for future generations. So which is what we needed to do in terms of public policies. But now when we think about the pandemic and the post-COVID reactivation, even more so, because these indicators are we're setting ourselves back decades to what we have advanced in the last few years. So I believe that there is a great opportunity from the point of view of the social environmental topic for the sector, so we can continue to leverage and developing this economic development. And of course, being very clear and strategic on how we should be investing resources, apart from how should we be collecting the resources that are generated by these activities. And with that, I will finish and we can continue the discussion, because I believe there were very broad questions to be answered.
Thank you so much, Minister, Vice Minister Galvez. The floor is yours. Thank you so much for the invitation to this very interesting conversation regarding our natural resources and the international circumstances that we are going through because of the COVID. First of all, I wanted to share, just for your information, some key pieces regarding the Peruvian economy. I believe that it is interesting that everyone joining us today takes this into account. The size of the Peruvian mining is more or less 10% of the GDP. The contribution of the mining sector is similar to its size. And we always get the impression that mining contributes a lot to the fiscal treasure party in the Peruvian case, it is similar to its size with relation to the GDP because the mining does not pay for general taxes on sales, and that is one of the main income that the fiscal revenues receive. So at the end of the day, the tax contribution that the mining sector has is important. Yes, sometimes it varies a lot. Sometimes it is 5% of the collection, and sometimes it is up to 20%, depending on the international prices. But the average is similar to its size in relation to the GDP in the economy. Now, where the mining sector has a great contribution is in the exports. 60% of the exports of Peru are minerals, and of that 60%, copper accounts for half of the exports, and gold accounts for one quarter of the exports. And the rest is a list of different minerals, including zinc, lead, silver, molybdenum, iron, etc., etc. Those minerals together account for 25% of the exports, and our main production comes from open pit mines, but we also have a significant production that is conducted underground in Peru. And the formal mining activity is highly regulated in Peru. We have environmental entities that are independent and that are enforcing the fulfillment of the environmental assessments, that is in everything that has to do with large and small mining. But we have a wide variety of informal mining activities that go beyond what the laws and the regulations say. So that was only for you to have an idea regarding the context in which the mining activity takes place in Peru. We do agree with you in that the mining sector needs to bring development to the territories where the mining companies actually operate, and also that that duty is not an easy one to achieve, and it is the most complicated part of the development of mining projects. Mining is seen as highly beneficial for the country overall, but at the same time, it is seen as if it would give a little contribution to the local areas, and through royalties, the mining sector is making a contribution to the local governments, and those resources are not being used properly. And that is something that we definitely need to fix in the future. Also, I wanted to share with you that we agree with this idea that mining needs to be helping us to diversify the production of the country. And also, we shouldn't only export minerals, but we should export mining. The entire supply chain that the mining sector has needs to be able to develop itself in order to provide services and goods to other countries abroad. And with that, the contribution of the mining sector to the country would be so much higher and greater. And that is all for now. Thank you. Thank you so much. That was great. I would like to raise a point because it was mentioned directly or indirectly by each one of you, and it's about the integration of the mining sector at the local level. Because it would seem that there is still effort to be made there in order to ensure that those communities that are affected by the mining activities somehow still get the benefits that come from the mining sector. And I would like to link this somehow with one of the trends that we have seen, which is this factor of automation and digitalization. That yes, they do open up opportunities, for instance, using the new technologies not only for the mining sector, but also to develop the different territories where the mining activity is conducted. But it also has an impact with relation to fewer workers, maybe, fewer opportunities to local suppliers, because the technologies that will be needed are more developed. So, how would you guarantee that that transition, where some people will say that the benefits are even less in the communities or in the regions, how would you guarantee that that changes in time? Or how would you use this trend in order to support both how to spend the money, the resources in the mining regions, or how to support the monitoring of the social and environmental impacts. Is there a way of doing this? And also, what is the role that the government can play in order to support a transition that happens in a positive manner and that is perceived as positive by the communities that live surrounding the mining projects? Okay, let's go for another round. Let's start with Ana Carolina. Thank you so much. Next time I'll switch it up. No, yes, I mean, it's a discussion that we have had in so many different scenarios, and especially with the partners of the Ford Foundation. I believe that there are many ideas on the table now. I am under the impression, and also listening to the other panel members, I believe that we need to give the sector its role as a promoter of the economy. Yes, it does have an important role to play, but it isn't the only sector, and this issue of the diversification needs to be on the agenda, and that happens at the national level, as the Vice Minister said it regarding the economic contribution of the mining sector, its participation in the economic activity, the GDP, etc., but it also happens at the level of the different territories. And sometimes, to promote the sector in the territories, we create expectations that are way beyond what the sector could actually be able to do in a certain territory. So I believe that yes, first of all, in terms of the contribution in the territories, in terms of productive diversification, it would be key. The support that the sector can give to the development of the economy beyond the productive chain with the sector itself. But I also believe that we need to be able to do this analysis, this cost benefit analysis, including all the elements, financial and social and environmental aspects, because this isn't only a question about how do we make people feel that they have benefits. Well, it might just be that some projects will not give them benefits. For instance, comparing the financial factors, environmental and social factors, maybe at the end of the day they just don't get to have a benefit. And maybe the production in that sector needs to be different and not mining. And we have to be open to listen to the voices of the territories to make sure that what we are actually promoting there is the development of that territory, considering their expectations and the expectations of the communities there because they know what they need for their social, environmental, and productive development. And for me, that requires that we have an honest conversation regarding the financial contribution of the activity or the different impacts. And in some cases, yes, it's worthwhile having a project, and in some cases, it just isn't. Thank you so much, Ana Carolina. Alejandra. Well, we are of the opinion that in the Industrial Revolution, in this 4.0 revolution, we are seeing the revolution. However, the impacts and the fruits are still to be seen. I believe that the adoption of digital technologies like automation and robotics, etc., they are deploying it at the moment. However, we still need to wait to receive the benefits, and of course, it takes greater development in infrastructure. Then we're going to have a conversation regarding cybersecurity, system integration, data management, automation of processes, etc., etc. And I believe that even though the impacts will be seen in the future years, that probably gives us a window of time that would allow us to get ready in order to somehow properly tackle the challenges in productivity and to do improvements in our operations to guarantee the sustainability of the industry. But also, we have to work on inclusion and equality. That is key for the social licensing of the sector, which means that we are able to identify efforts that can be developed jointly in order to face and tackle the impacts that will be produced by this transformation in how mining takes place. Thank you for that, Minister Mesa. Well, I'm going to disagree a little bit with Ana Carolina in order to make this panel a little bit controversial, I believe that there is a very clear principle that, of course, is something that we all agree upon, which is that the extractive industry is capital intensive and not labor intensive. But when we talk about large projects, that is the case. In our countries, in Peru and in Colombia, there is a mining activity which is artisanal and it is very large and it is labor intensive. And it is an activity that takes place for over 485 years. It has been taking place for many years now. Precisely yesterday, I was in the department of Caltas here in Colombia, and this village had royalties that were given by Simon Bolivar, and they are still valid. And in mining, I believe that we have to find a way of making it formal, but always bearing in mind that it will continue to be a small scale mining where probably the processes of automation and digitalization will not get there, at least not for some time, and probably they will never get there. I believe that in the larger scale, these are processes that will improve the operations with, I would say, a very small effect over the labor because those operations are no longer labor intensive. Now, where we do have an opportunity is in the training of people, in formalizing training so that mining activity is conducted respecting the environment. In Colombia, we are trying to apply different policies, of course, because we can't demand a single miner the same standards that we are demanding from a company that is doing underground mining from the environmental standard, of course. They shouldn't use cyanide, mercury, etc. They need to be committed with reforestation programs to decrease their footprint, etc., etc. There is a great opportunity to continue to generate employment, but having the environment first also. Inviting artisanal miners to pay taxes because when they do it, they feel proud. When they become legal, they do not need to be in the black market, etc., etc. So there is a great opportunity to acknowledge that mining that has been going on for 500 years, that it's still valid, of course, fulfilling the technical and environmental standards. Thank you, Minister. Minister, Vice Minister Galvez, you have a lot of informal mining in Peru as well. Maybe feel free to complement that comment. Yes, we have so much to learn from the Colombian experience. They are making great progress in this process of accompanying artisanal miners. We have started a similar process, but the mining sector is so broad. And now with the prices of gold that have increased so much lately and so much unemployment because of the crisis, because of the COVID crisis, this is an informal sector that became an alternative for so many people. This is an alternative for employment for them, but unfortunately, it does not happen in the best of conditions. However, it is quite the opposite in many cases, especially in the Peruvian Amazon. They are destroying the territory and the environment in the process of extracting gold with mercury and with pieces of machinery that are larger. So there has been sort of a business created around artisanal mining where there is a mix of informality, artisanal activities, and illegal activities as well. And to organize that space is an effort that we are trying to do, but we're losing the battle, to be honest. This is a battle that we're losing. I mean, the illegal mining continues to move in a faster pace in comparison to the pace that we are moving at. And in that sense, the lessons learned and the international cooperation are key in order to disseminate the best practices. Now, on behalf of mid-size and large-size mining activities, Peru does have a very well-developed legal framework that's very demanding and at the same time it is very attractive and it works fairly well in general. The problem is that The perception in the territory is that in many cases, mining doesn't even contribute to the development of the local territories where it takes place. And that is a conflict. It is an ongoing conflict. In the case of Peru, we see, for instance, that in Chile nobody questions that copper is the salary of Chile. But in Peru, we still have sectors of the society and of the population that do not want mining in their territories. They think about royalty, they want the taxes, but they do not want mining. So it is a huge effort of dialogue, of consensus, and of openness from the investors in order to promote social agreements that benefit everyone. Now, this is achieved in some cases, and in some cases it isn't. For instance, in the case of Quellaveco, which is a large operation of over $5 billion of investment in copper in a very dry area, they were able to achieve a social agreement prior to the construction of the mining facility, and that was way beyond what the Peruvian law established as a commitment that the companies need to take with their social environment wherever they operate. And we see that this initiative from Anglo American for this project in particular, we see this as an example to be followed in other places. However, not everyone, as Ana Carolina said it herself, not all the projects are just like profitable. They're not all similarly big, and not all the projects are able to provide the same benefits to the society and to the communities. And in that sense, we need a more effective state. Unfortunately for ourselves, in our process of regionalization of the country, we are allocating many resources to different mining regions, but there is a lack of capabilities in managing the resources. So there's a gap that we need to close to make mining activities more attractive to the mining regions.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Now I will be choosing some questions that were coming in, but I'm going to be choosing three that we still haven't spoken about. One, my own, is related to cooperation among countries. As you mentioned, in the mining sector in Colombia, especially in the area of the artisanal area, there could be some lessons learned and some cooperation in the region. Many times, we see also how they are somehow competing certain countries in order to attract investment. But if you look at the case of artisan mining or the case of copper, where Peru and Chile make a big amount in terms of global production, what possibilities of cooperation in specific points among the Andean countries do you see? I'm especially interested in that because that is part of what we try to promote through the project. Then there's another question that was coming in, and I believe it is very interesting. It is as follows: the trends for energy transition result in opposing scenarios for different administrative sectors. So, do you consider that your country is prepared to face them? I believe that is specifically aiming to carbon and oil in comparison to others that sometimes the demand will be rising in the long term. And this is directed to Minister Mesa. And I believe this is related to the comment of the artisanal sector. So that is when they are intensive in labor, artisan mining could be a good option to promote the economic reactivation in regions that have mining potential. Are there any policies to promote the development of artisan mining over the business exploitation of large scale? So now, the other way around, just to give Ana Carolina a bit more time, I will start with you, Vice Minister Galvez. Yes, delighted. I believe that there's a big field for the country cooperation. we see the Colombian experience and we can learn from it in order to improve our policies in regards of artisanal mining. In fact, we are defining a policy of promotion of artisan mining and small-scale mining, and we believe that we're going to have great opportunities of consulting on the experience of Colombia. And on the side of large and medium-sized mining, we also have a lot to learn from the Chilean experience. In fact, we see with interest all of this consensus that has been created in Chile regarding mining and the different institutions that participate. Hasta Ley, Expande in Chile, these are several institutions that have been recently created, and what they're trying to do is to promote more environmentally friendly mining with more technology use. And we also are following that process. We are still in a more initial stage. For instance, there's this topic of the technological roadmap for mining that Chile has developed for some years already and has been recently updated. And we are just making it and trying to apply it. And the idea here is that the country won't just be exporting ore, they will be exporting mining. So that is knowledge and development in the mining sectors and with an alliance as well as other vendors of international standards, and they promote the innovation and technology in this world of mining providers, which is a very dynamic world and that is way more diverse and vast than we can imagine at a glance. So I believe that there's a couple of examples here. There's a third one, which is the topic that we started this conversation with regarding how the mining territory can develop thanks to the presence of natural resources, and not only the national state will be benefiting from this, but also the mining territory. How can we achieve to improve our public policies so mining, instead of being questioned in the territories, is requested by them? So that will be interesting. And I believe that this is open. Mining and agriculture, this is something that all countries need to comment on. Thank you very much, Minister Mesa. I will be replying to two other questions that you gave here. The first one that was directed to myself, but the first is that was about the topic of the energy transition and how can we have opposing scenarios as a result of the transition. I believe that more than opposing, what could be here is complementary results on policies with different energies. So, and I use the case of Colombia to illustrate what I'm saying. So, one of the policies in the administration is the participation of non-conventional renewable energies for simple reasons, because we have a great potential for developing both wind as sun energy, as solar energy, and we were lagging behind for a number of reasons, but everything now was missing, and we were just needing a push from the public point of view of policies. Second, because we have some commitments of sustainable development and international agreements such as COP21, etc. So our grid in Colombia and our potential is very diverse. We have a generation grid that is quite clean. We depend on 75% of hydroelectrical plants, which is a renewable resources. Despite they're very clean, we're very exposed to the climate change effects that put the dams on stress when there's a phenomenon which is El Nino, which was a bit predictable before, but now is very unpredictable. So here we have the complementarity of non-conventional renewable energies for the matrix. And of course, we all know the variability of that resources, that we need to have a backup in order to prevent for what happened in California last month. There was an overflow of renewable energy generation, and they reached the system and caused stress on the variability of that type of sources. So in Colombia, we have natural gas, we have carbon, And thinking about the transition and thinking that we need to comply with the international commitments, we have decided to talk about a portfolio strategy, not discriminating any energy per se, but see how can we complement on the different resources that we have in Colombia. And that is what we're doing. So that is from the point of view of energy as it is. Of course, coal, which is our main exporting product for mining, has another series of complexities that are no longer associated to energy generation in Colombia. And it has come to the same as with internationally, has happened with carbon, and the pandemic sped up this post carbon world where we're entering. So here we have a separate cooperation to show a strategy of a fair transition that has been lived by these states in the United States, has been lived by other countries as well. So it was simpler to say that I don't believe that we have opposing, but we have complementary ideas that allow us to use the resources in an optimal way from the point of view of from the environmental, economic, and social point of view. The question of artisan mining, it is, I don't believe it can be strong enough so it is a reactivation engine. I believe that reactivation, apart from the generation of jobs and reactivating the economy and attract more investment, of course, will be weighing more on the large mining projects, but I do believe that this is a source to preserve employment, which is a more formal way. And that is why we have a differential focus here in Colombia, both from the technical point of view as well as the environmental point of view, to bring these mining companies that now do it in an informal way for the legality, uh, joining them technologically speaking, banking them as well for those who enter the banking system. And so there's an opportunity of job preservation and also formalization of jobs, which I believe is also fundamental. And here, just to wrap up, and again, I would like to share what the Vice Minister said, and we need to separate very well what is informal or artisan mining, that this is illegal extraction. And in Colombia, we have decided and also have had to do a lot of pedagogy on the topic because small miners could interpret that they will be pursued or chased around, but it's quite the opposite. We want to pursue illegal activity because even in a greater scale than Peru, we have it in Colombia, and it has become a, a source of income for unlawful groups. Because it's a more profitable source than narco trafficking for drug dealing, and it becomes too more attractive for unlawful groups because once they can transport gold, it is a lot easier to transport than cocaine from the point of view of international borders and what generates the transport business. So it is the frontal fight against illegal activity. Is absolute and radical. We put a law, pass a law to pursue all of the links in the chain, which is in the case not only of extraction, but the ones that do transport, trading, etc. But we also provide all support to artisanal minings where we can perceive we can have formalized jobs in a very significant way. Excellent. Thank you very much. Alejandra. Well, I believe that your question has two dimensions. And first of all, I believe that we do have a lot of space for collaboration. As mining countries, we need to attract investments that today we know are investments that go hand in hand with the quality of the investment. Not only the projects are assessed in financial terms, but also by other dimensions, as you presented that yourself just now when you opened this webinar. And I believe that here, the challenge for everyone, for all of our countries, is the need that we should understand that the context conditions and the regional challenges should be complied with. What we think, in a way, we need is to harmonize the coming of these new standards with regulations and assessment of investment of each country. We require that investments will have added more directly the contribution to the development of local capacities, innovation, technology, and environmental impact. And in the same way, it is important that the local framework should just basically, I am so sorry about that noise, but I have a child who is just knocking on my window. Yeah. Yeah, that is what happens in the pandemic world. I am so sorry about that interruption. Not a problem, Ale. I also have a closed door in my home, so my kids don't come in. I have to close the curtain even. So, well, I was talking about the institutional framework. In our countries, it's necessary that we recognize capacity building, local capacity building, sustainability, which is where we have done the most improvement, and also inclusion, such as more protagonic, the key participation in the territory to create sustainable value, mining activity, which is something that has been present throughout the conversation. And we need to uh, see how social investment should be complemented with productive investment. And this is what, because this is the one that maybe has the most capacity of impacting the territories. And in concrete, and coming back to the of the opportunity of offering low carbon minerals, of course, there are opportunities for collaboration. I believe in Chile, well, I think in Chile and Peru as the biggest copper producers. And I believe that we can, however, develop some sort of hub of services that these minerals need: traceability, compensation, recovery of biodiversity, electromobility, green hydrogen. Of course, each country can do this in their own terms, but I believe there are huge opportunities and synergies that of having an integrated agenda that will allow to standardize, for instance, the human capital systems as integrated strategy in terms of services for environmental services, generate roadmaps for the development of technological solutions, where maybe the countries will be having different specializations. In the case of Chile, we clearly have advantages in the solar energy or green hydrogen scope, but just the detail of thinking that between Peru and Chile in the future, the close future, we will be having a fleet of high tonnage trucks that is going to be the largest in the world for green hydrogen. It allows us to think that we maybe have a lot of room for cooperation. These challenges, without a doubt, are of such scale that I believe they require to have joint efforts and joint capacity so we can, in fact, become a region that offers not only the minerals that the world needs, but also the solutions, the low carbon solutions and sustainable solutions that the world also needs.
Thank you so much, Ale. Ana Carolina, would you like to make a comment? Thank you. I'm going to make a comment regarding the question of the different commodities, and then I will address the issue of cooperation. Regarding this topic, I believe that it is very important that we take steps in our countries to think about a future decarbonization. Of course, the impact that this will have on the bet that Colombia has done in terms of carbon is very important, but also in terms of oil, even though it won't happen as soon as the effect on coal. And in the case of coal, I believe that one of the things that I find very interesting is what Minister Mesa said. We have to think about a fair, sustainable transition for those regions that depend heavily on that activity. And the Guajira is very interesting because these are regions where the energy transition will evolve towards other types of energy. But I believe it is very interesting to start sooner than later. I believe that we are already running late thinking about a fair diversification of the production of the territories. I also believe it is key that we don't end up trapping ourselves in the fact that the global markets are closing up and now we will go back to using coal in Colombia because one of the qualities, as Minister Mesa said, of Colombia is that we have an energy matrix which is relatively clean. And even though there are many challenges regarding the stability of the energy and the matrix itself, I believe that the worst situation would be to increase the contribution of coal. I understand that between 2018 and 19, it increased in 5%. We were using more coal as a source of energy in Colombia, and I believe that there are, of course, certain specific circumstances that could account for this, but I believe that there is an alarm that we have to take a close look at. And in the case of oil, even though it doesn't mean thinking about a transition throughout the regions that are producing oil, we definitely have to think about betting on exploiting oil in the Amazon region because it is one of the most sensitive ecosystems in the world and it has the potential for forests, which is key for climate change, etc., etc. There are several leads that we have to follow in terms of that energy transition, both in Colombia and Peru, definitely. I also believe, Nicolas, that in terms of cooperation, now moving on to your second question, there are so many opportunities, and you were asking a question in your presentation regarding how to compatibilize attracting investments with keeping up with the social and environmental standards. And I believe that part of the problems that the sector is facing is that many times the competition for attracting investment happens with decreasing the environmental requirements and the social requirements, of course. And if there is cooperation at a higher level between the countries, in order to put in place certain minimum standards for social environmental factors, I believe that we can improve that situation. And there are some initiatives already ongoing in Africa between African countries that are potential suppliers of minerals for the energy transition in terms of having a conversation around the African Union regarding agreeing on things because we know that the minerals will have a peak of demand and maybe in Latin America we should have something like that and I understand that ICLAC is leading the work towards that and I believe that it would be key because that would be a very good support to guarantee that the mining boom that will happen in the future will happen with the necessary environmental social standards that our countries need. There's also potential regarding learning beyond the mining operation itself. We have to learn regarding consultation and participation process. Both the governments of Colombia and Peru signed the Escazú Agreement, and the governments have made declarations in terms of their commitments regarding environmental participation. There was a study conducted, actually published by Espacio Público with Chile regarding different schemes of participation, consultation, and dialogue in both countries. And I believe that it's a topic that we could definitely help each other on to learn the best practices, to share the best practices, the lessons learned, especially to understand most of all, Nicholas, it isn't only about making investments attractive in the territories, it's about paying attention to what the territory has to say because the communities can say so much regarding how to engage in better mining and where to do it, where not to do it, and in which conditions. So it's not only about disseminating the projects and the potential benefits, it's more about listening, paying attention in order to design the projects to fulfill the expectations of the communities. Great. Thank you so much. We're almost running out of time, and I would like to give you just one final minute. We keep talking about so many different topics, but I just wanted to hear what is it that you have to say? What do you think needs to happen now in the following months? We're still in the middle of a pandemic, and we keep talking about what are we going to do in the long run. But once again, let's come back to the present time. What is the next step that you see that it needs to be taken in the countries where you are working? Just 1 minute each, please. I'm going to start with the Vice Minister Galvez, please. A pleasure, thanks. In relation to the pandemic, we have not recovered completely yet in the mining sector. The open pit mines are almost, I would say, going back to the pre-COVID level, but the underground mines still have problems with the availability of labor, with the protocols, and they are producing, I would say, 20% less than what they were producing before the COVID hit, before the emergency situation happened. I believe that the sector is making progress, and by the end of the year, the mining sector will have recovered. They do not need any greater support from the government. The protocols are getting better by the day, and there are so many things that we still have to solve with the workers. They are now doing longer shifts, and that, of course, brings along complications for the family life of the mining workers. But definitely, I wanted to share with you one initiative that Peru is working on, which is called Remake, which is a get to a word that's called convergency dialogue. And this is the center of convergence and good mining practices that was created a couple of years ago, and it proposed a vision for Peru. But this vision came from representatives not only of the companies but also of the civil society, the academia, and the state. This is an initiative that we are going back to in order to put new challenges on the table to have a better mining in the future. And one of the pillars of this proposal is to bring this vision to the territories. Two areas of Peru were selected in the north, Cajamarca, in the south, Moquegua, and there will be national dialogues. Precisely, going back to what Carolina said, to pay attention to what the regions have to say, not only to push a project down their throats in any way with enthusiasm or with anything it takes. We have to listen to the regions, and the mining projects have to be part of a regional territorial project, and they have to respond to the expectations of the regions. And this is something that we're going to be doing in the following months. And definitely, we will disseminate the outcome with everyone else. We are receiving the support of the IDB for this initiative. Great, thank you so much. Minister Mesa? Thank you. Thank you, Nicholas. Well, the opening and closing was not as balanced. Apparently, you were choosing us in the same order or giving the floor in the same order, but it's good that we have a good group. It was a great panel. Thank you so much once again. I think it was very balanced out and it was very open to discussion. And just to wrap up very quickly, I believe that the opportunity that COVID is giving us and that the pandemic is giving us is to be able to speed up the processes of energy transition in two different fronts. First, in the issue of incorporating renewable energies at the large and small scale. Colombia, as I said it earlier, we still have a gap to close in terms of energy quality. And this has been an opportunity to engage in regulatory changes to involve the private sector more in order to turn it into a partner to reach out to isolated sectors and regions of the country, promoting, of course, from the regulatory perspective, public policies that make it attractive for the private sector instead of just giving all that responsibility to the national government. And the other issue that I believe is key is that we have to raise awareness among people. I believe that most people have internalized this in terms of mobility. That is where the major opportunity is in terms of decreasing our footprint. The transportation actually is the sector that moves the needle to fulfill our sustainable development goals and to fight against climate change. And in that sense, there are several activities that we need to do. First, we need to be more aware of the fossil fuels that we use, especially for the transportation of people. And we have to use more public transportation in spite of the pandemic, that, of course, is restricting the capabilities that we have. But we have to use the online tools that we have available. It has been proven, at least in Colombia and by the government, that we can operate remotely without any issues whatsoever. The Ministry of Energy, let me tell you, was operating 100% remotely during the first 2 or 3 months of the pandemic, fully remotely. 100% of the workers were working from home, and I believe that was actually a great lesson that we learned. We had never done something similar. We would only do this in a small scale, maybe to test different communication models or so. But in the issue of transportation, I believe that we need to continue to speed up the use of electric vehicles, other fuels with a smaller footprint, with a smaller impact, and especially in Colombia, in the different cities, we have a major issue, not only with CO2, but also with the quality of air, which is the particulated material that fuels have. And we have conducted an effort to decrease those levels to historical minimum points to increase biofuels. We also have a voluntary program to mix over 10%, which is the regulatory mix for methanol and biodiesel, and we need to have the right incentives in place. That will make a huge difference. We just turned 1 year since we enacted the electric mobility law, and there are incentives to buy those type of equipments. And when we look at the numbers from 2019, with the law that had been enacted only 6 months ago, Colombia was leading the sales of electric vehicles in the region, above Chile and above the Dominican Republic, which are the other two countries that are betting on putting in place incentives for this type of mobility. And in the first half of the country, even with the pandemic, we still had sales of electrical vehicles that were increasing, I would say, in 60, 70% in comparison to 2019. And I believe that part of that is that people with the pandemic are realizing that those actions, individual actions, when they happen collectively, they do have a real impact over what's going on, over the climate and all that. And I believe that this is a great opportunity to be able to speed up that transition and to continue working on policies that lead people to make decisions that are made sensibly, of course, and that aim at decreasing our footprint and becoming neutral in the future. Thank you so much, Minister Mesa. Alejandra, I would love to see in the following months the promotion of the recovery with the necessary investments to speed up the digital transformation, and in the scope of sustainability, that this brings along greater productivity in many sectors, especially in the mining sector, with lower environmental impact, with lower emissions. And I believe that the pandemic especially has shown that there is a trend towards more sustainable mining and it needs to be promoted. We need to promote the production of green copper. That is an ethical imperative, and it is also a huge business opportunity for the mining sector in all of its ecosystem. With businesses and innovation, we know that the following months, especially next year, will be a very complex year for Chile. We have so many elections coming up in our political system, so many milestones that we're going to go through. And if we move forward with the new constitution, with the drafting of a new constitution, we know that all the eyes will be looking at Chile and will be looking at this sector as well and potential changes that this new constitution will bring along. But I insist, the 21st century is putting Chile and the Latin American region in a very good position in terms of competitiveness and also in terms of sustainable businesses. And I truly hope that the way out of this process is a way out in a win win situation for the country and for the sector as well. Thank you, Alejandra. Ana Carolina. Yes, the present is very important for the long run as well, because any decisions that we made in the following months will be key for whatever happens in the long run. I believe that the challenge and the most important is that those policies of financial recovery or economic transformation, like I said it earlier, continue to maintain and strengthen the social environmental standards at the highest quality and maintain the commitments of the countries regarding prior consultation, participation, etc., etc. I believe it is very important not to race to the bottom in order to promote the economic recovery that we set ourselves back. That is fundamental, but also from the perspective of being proactive, we need to use the resources that will be distributed in the following months to incentivize investments where we see that the sectors need it and they have the potential to become not only more sustainable but also more inclusive. So we need to make investments, reach out rural communities or other communities that are performing economic activities that have the potential of serving the smaller scale and to generate greater inclusion of women, rural communities, etc., etc. Great. Thank you so much. I believe that I wouldn't have been able to close better than you did, so I'll leave it at that. And thank you so much to the panel members for their time. Thank you for your contributions as well. Thank you so much to the audience for the great questions that they sent in. And also, I wanted to thank once again to the entire team that is organizing the webinar and that has organized the webinar. I know that they've been working for so long to make this a successful webinar. And with that, to the audience, I just wanted to mention that this series of webinars is over for now, but there will be another session on October the 29th where Alejandra will be the moderator of a session that will focus so much more on the technological impact, which is a topic that we swiftly covered today. So if you want to be part of that session, with experts on that topic, please sign up on mythos.net or feel free to contact us in our organization. And with that, thank you so much once again, and I hope that you have a great day, and I hope to see you soon on October 29th. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye bye.
Adiós.
Chao, hasta luego.
El rol de la industria extractiva en la reactivación económica. El mundo atraviesa una grave crisis sanitaria y económica por la aparición del virus del COVID-19 y las medidas de confinamiento necesarias para contener su avance. En este momento sigue la incertidumbre sobre la evolución de la pandemia y se han visto rebrotes en varios países, aunque se ven señales de reactivación económica. Los países de la región tienen una presencia importante de industria extractiva y explotan y exportan commodities como petróleo, cobre, oro y carbón, entre otros. La explotación de estos recursos es importante para sus cuentas nacionales, al ser una fuente importante de ingresos fiscales y por representar una proporción importante de sus canastas exportadoras. Además, las empresas son una fuente de empleos y dinamizadoras de economías locales. Mientras que algunos commodities han visto fuertemente afectado su precio, otros han ganado atractivo y se han cotizado al alza. Dado el tamaño de la industria y las capacidades en la región, se espera que la industria extractiva juegue un rol importante en la necesaria reactivación económica. ¿Qué rol puede jugar la industria extractiva en esta reactivación? ¿Qué tendencias se profundizarán o acelerarán por efecto de la pandemia? Con el apoyo de Cooperación Alemana GIZ, EITI Colombia, EITI Perú. El rol de la industria extractiva en la reactivación económica. El mundo atraviesa una grave crisis sanitaria y económica por la aparición del virus del COVID-19 y las medidas de confinamiento necesarias